Hi everybody, welcome to the Crying Baby case study. This is just an opportunity for programming students to practice their skills and see if they can figure out how to create a modular program which processes an array of integers and maybe some other arrays and other data types too. The scenario is a computer game which allows players to feed candies to a baby. And apparently the baby loves red candy. Okay, so first the player chooses how many candies will be fed to the baby, and then feeding time starts. And each time we feed the baby, we just feed it a random candy out of the candy bag. At the end of feeding time, we evaluate how many red candies were fed to the baby, how many green candies were fed to the baby, and how many blue candies were fed to the baby. And if the number of red candies is greater than all the other candies combined, the baby starts laughing. Otherwise, the baby starts crying. So take a moment to think about this scenario, and then we're going to look at an algorithm which has been designed in the form of a flowchart. So here is the algorithm which a program designer has come up with to solve this problem. And it looks like we're going to be using an array of length 3 to help us manage data in the program. The identifier or name of this array is candy counts. So I'm assuming that this array will be an array of integers. Then, we ask the player how many candies to feed the baby, and we get some information from the player. This is the number of candies that we're going to feed, and then we start the game loop. And we can imagine that I is the control variable of this game loop. Now we know how many candies we're going to be feeding to the baby, so this could be a for loop. Or it could be a while loop. It could be a do-while loop. It's up to you to figure out what kind of loop will satisfy the requirements of the problem. But in the game loop, we're going to call a function and get a random candy, and then we're going to feed that candy to the baby by calling another function. And then we're going to increment the next loop. And when the loop is finished, we're going to evaluate the candy count. And remember, if the number of red candies is greater than all the other candies combined, then the baby will start laughing. Otherwise, the baby will start crying. Now we can see here that evaluate candy counts returns something. And if we keep going, we're asking, is result true? So I'm assuming evaluate candy counts returns a Boolean. I'm assuming result is Boolean according to this design logic. Okay. I'm also assuming that this get random candy is returning a string. I'm just going to suggest it's returning a string, red, green, or blue. I'm also going to suggest that in my candy counts array, the first element of the array refers to how many red candies were eaten. The second element in the array refers to how many blue candies were eaten. And the third element in the array refers to how many green candies were eaten. Okay, so we'll kind of have a look at that as we get programming. So let's start programming, guys. The first thing I'm going to do is set up my integer array of length 3. So let's go. I've already started a main class here. I've got my candy count project up and running. I'm not sure if I'm going to be using global variables yet, but in my main function, I'm going to declare some local variables. I've got an integer array called candy counts, which is a new integer array of length 3. Now remember, when we run this code, Java very conveniently puts a value of 0 into each space or at each index in the array. right? So at index 0, we'll have a value 0. At index 1, we'll have a value 0. And at index 2, we'll have a value 0. Thank you, Java, for helping out. And as I said, I'm going to suggest the first element in the array tells us how many red candies there are. The second element tells us how many blue candies there are. And the third element tells us how many green candies there are. Or something like that. You can decide how you want to manage that. Okay, what's next? Next, we're going to ask how many candies to feed the baby. So that's pretty straightforward. And then we're going to get that data from the user into a variable called candies. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to create another local variable in my main function, and I'm going to use that variable I'm going to assign a number to that variable. I could use the scanner class and do some user input from the keyboard, but just for this I'm going to do a math.random. And let's say we always feed at least 10 and up to 20 candies to the baby, something like that. Okay, what's next? Then we're going to go into our loop. Okay, so I could do a for loop. Why not? I could do this because I know how many times I want the loop to iterate. So I could say for int I equals 0 to I is less than candies, I plus plus. That's one way to do it. Okay. I could also just do a while loop. Okay, so let's do a while loop as well. I'm going to create a local variable called I, and I'm going to assign it a value of 0, similar to what we're seeing here. And then while I is less than candies, we're going to be doing this stuff here. Okay, so let's start the loop. While I is less than candies, we're going to do the game loop code. And the game loop code is, we've got this thing called candy, which grabs something returned from the getRandomCandy function. Now in my design, I'm going to assume that this getRandomCandy function returns a string. It's going to be either red, green, or blue. Okay, so let's do that. String candy equals getRandomCandy. And then we're going to feed the baby that candy. The purpose of this function is to update the values in the candy counts array. That's what feed baby does. So there's a bit of logic in there which updates the values in this array. We'll get there when we get there. And we're going to send the candy into the feed baby function. Remember, that's a string. Candy is a string. And don't forget, if we're doing a while loop, we need to increment I, or we're not going to have a loop. Okay, so that's what's going on here. If we were using a for loop to do that, we wouldn't need to do that. Okay. So now that we've done that, let's just have a look at how to design these functions. GetRandomCandy doesn't have any parameters, but it does return a string. This function returns a string. So after the main function is finished, let's design the getRandomCandy function. There are no parameters. And the purpose of this function is to randomly return red, green, or blue. Now it's up to you how you do that. It should be random to make it fun. Just to get my program up and running, I'm going to do some really basic code. I'm always going to return red. Okay, just to get the program up and running. Okay, I'll figure out the other logic later. So hopefully, why am I getting an error here? It's because I haven't typed that correctly. Brilliant. So I no longer have an error on that line. Now I'm going to design the feed baby function. The feed baby function doesn't seem to return anything, but it does take a string as a parameter. So let's go outside the getRandomCandy function. Static. Doesn't return anything, but it takes a string as a parameter. I'm just going to call it C. Doesn't matter what you call it, it's just a parameter. And this function is going to update this array. So for example, if C, which is our parameter, is the same as the word red, then I'm going to update the first element in the candy counts array, because the first element in the array refers to the red candy count. Okay. So if this string equals red, notice when we're comparing strings, you should use dot equals. Don't use equal equal like we do with integers and other data types. Use dot equals. Okay. And if you're not sure why, go and do some research. Okay. Candy counts I plus. Not candy counts I, is it? I want to update the first element, which is index 0. So I'm updating the first element, the value of the first element at index 0 in this array. I'm adding 1 to it. Okay. Now, why am I getting an error? I'm getting an error because I declared candy counts as a local variable in the main function. This variable is not visible to any other function. The feed baby function cannot see that. It's local in main. So I've got a choice here. I could send this candy counts into the feed baby function. I could send this reference to this array into this function, and then I have to redesign the function to make that work. Or another option, which is the lazy option, which I'm going to choose right now, is to make candy counts a global variable. Okay, so let's make candy counts a global variable. So I'm declaring it as a global variable. And then in main, I'm going to initialize its length to 3. So declare it, and then initialize it when you need to initialize it. Okay. Now, if we go down to feed baby, we no longer have the error. Okay. Now, if you can figure out how to design this program without any global variables, I would say that's a job well done. So this is just a starter video to help you get started with the Candy Crying Baby case study. Get started and see if you can code the logic for the entire program. Have a go.